A sharp antiseptic smell jolted me awake. I squinted against the glaring surgical lights above. Straps held my wrists tight, and a wave of confusion and fear hit me. I tried to move, but I couldn't. Why was I strapped to an operating table? The day before, I went to the hospital for a routine checkup. I was stressed out, and my doctor suggested I stay overnight for observation. A friendly nurse gave me a sedative to help me relax. She assured me that everything would be fine. When I woke up, I was strapped to a surgical table. The straps were cold and tight against my skin. Fear gripped me, yet my body remained frozen. The sedative had left me completely paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Voices drifted around me, clinical and detached. They mentioned someone named Warren Johnson, saying he was ready for surgery. The name sent a jolt of confusion through me. Warren Johnson? That wasn't my name. My thoughts were frantic, silently pleading for them to realize they had the wrong person. A surgeon moved into my view. His face was hidden by a mask, but his eyes were serious. He checked the monitors and nodded, seemingly satisfied. A tray of surgical tools gleamed under the harsh lights. I saw scalpels and heard a mini buzzsaw being tested. My heart raced faster. The anesthetist leaned over me, preparing to administer another dose. I tried to move, to signal that they were making a mistake. My fingers twitched slightly, but no one noticed. The anesthetist's face was above mine, hidden by a mask and glasses, looking cold and impersonal. The moment stretched into an eternity as the anesthetist's gloved hands hovered over me. I could feel my breath quickening. Each inhale a desperate plea for time. Each exhale a whisper of doom. The surgical lights bore down on me, casting harsh shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. The surgeon's steady hands adjusted the positioning of the surgical tools on the tray, the metallic clinks echoing ominously in the sterile room. The buzzsaw's test run filled the air with a mechanical hum, a hint of the terror to come. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my temple, the only sign that my body still recognized the gravity of my situation. As the anesthetist moved closer with the syringe, I could hear my pulse in my ears, a relentless drumbeat. The white ceiling above me felt like it was collapsing, transforming the room into a suffocating cage. My mind raced through every possible outcome, each one more dreadful than the last. Would they realize their mistake before it was too late? Or would I be another statistic in the long list of medical mishaps? The anesthetist's eyes, cold and detached, reflected none of the panic I felt. They were trained to see patients as cases, problems to be solved, not as individuals with stories and fears. The nurse's earlier comforting words now seemed like a twisted joke, leading me into this nightmare. I focused all my willpower on my fingers, trying to make them move again. This time, I felt a slight, barely noticeable twitch. It wasn't much, but it was something. A flicker of life, a signal that I was still here, still fighting. I strained every muscle, every nerve ending in my body, to move, to scream, to do anything to break free from this paralyzing nightmare. But my efforts were in vain. Suddenly, the door to the operating room burst open. A nurse rushed in, whispering urgently to the surgeon. The room went silent, everyone freezing in their tasks. I watched as the surgeon's eyes widened in realization. He turned to the anesthetist, who had halted mid-motion, syringe poised above my arm. The atmosphere was charged with urgency. My mind raced with hope and fear, a frantic combination that pushed my mind to the brink of madness. The surgeon leaned closer to the nurse, his voice a harsh whisper. "We can't have a mistake like this. Double-check the records. Now." The anesthetist, visibly shaken, stepped back and moved to a nearby computer terminal. The tension in the room was suffocating, every second stretching into an eternity. I could feel my body straining against the paralysis, desperate to scream, to move, to do anything to stop this nightmare. The anesthetist's face went pale. There's been a mix-up. This is not Warren Johnson. This is Mr. Donald Trump. Dr. Harris's eyes flicked to mine, then back to the anesthetist. With a chilling calmness, he said, "We can't go back. Let's proceed." The forest was known for its secrets, but I never imagined it would swallow my best friend whole. When I parked my car at the edge of the campsite, the trees loomed like silent sentinels, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Mark, my college buddy, had insisted on this spot for our weekend escape, a place untouched by civilization, perfect for reconnecting with nature. He had arrived a day earlier to secure the best spot by the lake. But now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, his absence felt like a bad omen. Mark's car was there, parked haphazardly, doors slightly ajar. I called out his name, expecting his usual laugh to echo back. Instead, I was met with a silence so thick it seemed to have a weight of its own, pressing down on me from all sides. The air was cold, and the forest, once inviting, now felt like it was closing in, hiding something it didn't want me to find. The evening air turned colder as I walked to the campsite. The forest felt like it was closing in around me. I found Mark's tent, perfectly set up with his stuff neatly arranged inside. But still, no sign of him. I thought he had gone for a walk, or a swim in the lake. As the minutes turned into hours, and darkness fell, I built a fire to keep warm and signal my location. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the surrounding trees, and I felt like I was being watched. The forest was very quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and distant owl hoots. The stillness around me was so intense that even the smallest sounds of twigs snapping were startlingly loud. Around midnight, I heard it, a soft, almost quiet sound of footsteps on the fallen leaves. My heart pounded as I listened. The footsteps were slow and seemed to circle the campsite. I called out again, "Mark, is that you?" But the only response was the empty echo of my own words, deepening the eerie silence. Then I saw it, a faint, bluish light deep within the woods. It pulsed gently, like a lantern swaying in the breeze, driven by a mix of curiosity and fear. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the light, stepping carefully. The forest grew denser, the trees seeming to close in behind me, blocking any retreat. As I got closer, the light became brighter, almost calling me. I found a small clearing, and in its center stood an old broken-down cabin. The light came from inside, casting an eerie glow through the cracks in the wooden walls. I hesitated at the door, feeling a thick, unexplainable fear. Gathering my courage, I pushed the creaking door open and stepped inside. The interior was surprisingly well kept, a stark contrast to the cabin's crumbling exterior. It was very tidy, with old furniture and trinkets that looked untouched by time. In the center of the room was an oil lamp, the source of the mysterious light. And there, sitting in an old rocking chair, was Mark. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly ahead, unblinking. I called his name softly, but he didn't respond. The whole scene felt wrong, like a dream that didn't quite make sense. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the cabin, extinguishing the lamp and plunging us into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my flashlight. When the beam finally pierced the darkness, Mark was gone. I was alone in the cabin. The door slammed shut behind me, and the sound of footsteps filled the room, though no one was there. Shadows danced along the walls, growing longer and more distorted, as if mocking my fear. I turned and ran, bursting out of the cabin and into the suffocating darkness of the forest. The footsteps chased me, relentless and closing in. The light from my flashlight flickered, threatening to die. As I stumbled over roots and bushes, the trees seemed to shift and move, as if alive, blocking my path and steering me deeper into the forest. Just when I thought I couldn't run anymore, I broke through the tree line and found myself back at the campsite. The fire had burned low, its embers casting a faint glow. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and an eerie silence settled over the campsite once again. It was the kind of silence that gets under your skin and stays there, long after the danger has passed. I waited until dawn, too afraid to close my eyes, every rustle and creak amplifying my fear. When the first light of day finally broke through the trees, I gathered my belongings with trembling hands and made my way back to the car. There was no sign of Mark. I reported his disappearance to the authorities, but their search yielded nothing. No footprints, no evidence, no trace of him at all. Time slipped by, and days became weeks. Mark was never found. The locals whispered about the woods, telling stories of people who had vanished without a trace, lured by mysterious lights and taken by someone, or something, that lived within. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest still watched and waited, its secrets buried deep among the shadows. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me. I avoid the woods and any mention of camping. The authorities closed the case, labeling Mark another unfortunate missing person. But I know the truth, or at least part of it. There's something in those woods, something ancient and evil, that takes those who stray too far into its domain. And it almost took me... The first night in my new house, I woke to the sound of someone crying. It wasn't loud, just a soft, heartbreaking sob that seemed to seep through the walls. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me after a stressful move. But when it happened again the next night, I knew something was wrong. I moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Avenue for a fresh start after my divorce, not expecting the charm of its high ceilings and intricate woodwork to be overshadowed by this eerie presence. I never imagined that my peaceful sanctuary would soon become a nightmare. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where you could leave your doors unlocked and not worry about it. But it wasn't long before the charm of the place started to wear thin. The first night I spent there, I was too exhausted to notice anything amiss. It was on the second night that I heard it, a soft, distant crying. At first I thought it was my imagination or perhaps a neighbor's child, but the sound persisted, pulling me out of my sleep. It was the kind of crying that pulled at your heartstrings, forlorn and desperate. I sat up in bed, straining to pinpoint the source. It seemed to come from within the walls themselves. I got up and walked through the house, my bare feet making soft thuds against the wooden floors. The crying grew louder as I approached the living room, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I stood there in the dark, heart pounding, listening to the silence. The next morning, I put it down to the stress of the move and the lingering emotional turmoil of the divorce. But the crying returned the following night, and the night after that. It became a nightly ritual, this ghostly weeping that no one else could hear. I asked my neighbors if they had heard anything strange, but they all looked at me with puzzled expressions. No one else had heard a thing. As the weeks passed, the crying continued. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on my work. My friends started to notice the dark circles under my eyes, and the way my hands shook when I held my coffee cup. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, I was falling apart. I needed to know what was causing the crying, if only to save my sanity. One night, determined to get to the bottom of it, I grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar. I started in the living room, where the crying was always the loudest. I pried open a section of the wall, half expecting to find nothing but insulation and wiring. Instead, I found a small hidden room, its walls lined with old yellowed wallpaper. The air inside was stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in decades. In the center of the room was a child's rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth as if pushed by an invisible hand. The crying was louder now, echoing off the walls, and an unsettling coldness took hold of me. I stepped into the room, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and saw something that filled me with dread. A tiny, worn-out teddy bear lying on the floor. As I bent down to pick it up, the crying suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening, almost more unsettling than the crying itself. I turned the teddy bear over in my hands, feeling a strange sense of sadness wash over me. It was then that I noticed the name stitched into the fabric. Lillian. For the next few days, the memory of that room and the name on the teddy bear haunted me. The crying returned each night, louder and more desperate. I could feel the presence of something unseen, something that needed to be acknowledged. Late one evening, as I was about to leave the hidden room, I felt a cold breeze sweep by me. The rocking chair began to move again, slowly at first, then faster. The crying started up, louder and more desperate than ever. I stood there, frozen, as a shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the room. It was a little girl, her eyes wide with fear, reaching out to me. I took a deep breath and spoke softly to her. "Lillian, it's okay. You're safe now. You can let go." The figure hesitated, then slowly began to fade. The crying grew fainter and fainter until it was just a whisper, and then, finally, it was gone. The house was silent that night, and for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. In the morning, the hidden room was just a room. Its secrets finally laid to rest. The rocking chair stood still, and the air felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Life slowly returned to normal. The dark circles under my eyes faded, and the tremor in my hands disappeared. My friends remarked on how much better I looked, and I smiled, knowing that Lillian had found her peace. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I think I hear the faint sound of a music box playing, and I know that somewhere, a little girl is finally at rest.